Hello and welcome to A Slice of Mental Health. I'm Cara, the daughter.
And I'm Tracy, the mum.
And this is our fourth episode in our first series, What Is? And today we're talking about what is naming feelings and how you go about doing that.
So, and we're going to be talking about what are feelings, how we recognise them, our experience look, how did we find out what these feelings were and how they impacted on us. And then we're going to talk about how we've navigated them, how we still navigate them, but how we navigated them, Cara through her childhood and through me learning more about my own mental health and how these feelings impacted on me. And then we'll share some of the things that work for us right now that help when we just have those normal feelings that all humans have. Well, human emotions.
And it's always, as we always do, we just clarify that we are coming from our experienced look. This is contextual to us and our family, and our own experiences and stories. So we'll go right in. So what is naming feelings? So the way that we kind of define naming feelings and the action of it, it's recognizing the emotion we are having and being able to articulate them so that we can have our needs met. Because when we're unable to name our feelings, it makes it really hard to have our needs met. And it's really how we're also able to communicate with those around us when we're feeling either a positive or negative emotion. I guess a good example would be when you're a child, you're hungry, you're able to say, "Mummy, food," or "Daddy, food," "I'm hungry." Or if you're tired, you're able to say, "Mummy, nap," or you show all the key signs of someone that's tired. So basically, as an adult, in the form of mental health, that would come in the form of being able to say, "Actually, this conversation is making me feel anxious, so can we move on?" And it's the process of listening to what your body's telling you, reading what's happening around you and what conversation is being had around you, and making a decision on how to protect your mental health based on those cues.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, isn't it, when we talk about how do we find the names for these feelings, and I guess it's how we learn those words, how do we get that language. And so to just talk about my kind of generation, in terms of naming feelings, I'm not sure that I know I had feelings, but I'm not sure that I knew them as feelings, which is a really weird thing to say. But
I get that.
yeah, it's like just something that happens, isn't it? So and having names for them, I mean, I probably had names like happy, sad, angry. I'm not even sure that I had word angry. Kind of, we'll talk about that in a minute.
You just had the reaction, response.
Yeah, but I didn't know it's anger because I'll tell you. We'll talk about that in a minute. Stressed. Yeah, I think stressed was a word that was used, but it's not really a lot of words to explain the range of emotions
that we as human beings have.
Yeah. So, and also we talked in the last podcast about generational trauma or generational behaviours or things that we learn, and I think that also informs how we show our feelings, how we either show them or how we talk about them, or do we just talk about the subject, that's making us feel upset, sad, angry, or whatever it is. And I had the learning in my family was that, and I've talked about being a crier, but I was allowed to cry. So I obviously had a range of different emotions, but they came out as being upset and crying. And some of that was that in our family, we didn't do anger. So that doesn't mean we didn't have anger. We had anger, but we didn't do anger. So anger was sort of suppressed as an emotion. It was there, but it wasn't outwardly displayed. And I'm not going to go into the details of why that was, but that was just what I think was felt to be the best thing for our family, was to keep those things given that anger and expressing anger wasn't a good thing to do.
But you could sense it was there.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. So
Do you think that has an impact? Like the emotion being there and being showed kind of what's the word I'm looking for?
well, it comes out in other ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, but like, you know, with sighing or like putting a glass down a bit too heavy or like slamming the door, like shutting the door a bit too hard or like making a sort of snide comment but not actually being able to say, I'm feeling really angry right now. Is that kind of, was it more subliminal? That's what I'm looking for. Like subliminal anger.
Yeah. Well, and anger. So anger's a normal emotion.
Yeah.
So that's the thing about these feelings, isn't it? It's like if you, and I'm talking very generational, and again we've been very clear. This isn't about apportioning blame to anybody's behaviour, and you may be in a situation where that is absolutely right to do. But this is more about how the generations were changing. So I didn't know how to name feelings in a way, although I was allowed to express certain feelings. One of them is sadness. Anger is a normal emotion, so let's just be clear. It's normal to get angry and it's normal to show that anger is valid.
Yeah.
But if you're not taught how to manage anger and you're picking it up, then that means you're having to deal with it in some other way. So yeah, I think what we then becoming a parent and what we're moving on to is then the importance of trying to then help your own child have those range of feelings, language. So one of the key things that we talk about is that in our family, anger was allowed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it was almost like because it was hidden but there, when next generation comes along, and I think that's the thing about parenting, you hope you're going to do better than your parents, or you're going to take the good things that you liked about your childhood through to the next generation and leave behind the things that you didn't like. And again, just to reinforce that every family has, or every new parent says, I'm not going to do that, or I'm not going to do that. So this is normal. So we're talking about normal patterns here. And one of the things that I was very conscious of was that anger was going to be okay to be expressed. It was a normal emotion.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Like, it's that validating way of talking. If someone comes to you or you're experiencing an emotion, it's holding a space for that emotion and being able to say you're allowed to be angry about this thing. That's okay, but it's what you do with that anger that makes it not okay. So if that anger is then, you know, this kind of links to the generational trauma in a way, but if that anger comes out in a form of violence, then because you're not expressing it appropriately via your words and you're not getting your need to calm down met, then that's where it becomes it's not okay to have that emotion in that way. Like one of the things that I've always practiced, and I'm not sure where I got it from. I don't think it's an original idea, but you know, I believe there's this thing that sometimes goes around in the mental health space. It's that no one's responsible for your emotions, and I slightly disagree with that. And I feel like people are allowed to make you upset. People can.
Well, they're not allowed, but they do.
No, sorry, yeah, they're not allowed, no, of course. But like, what I mean is like that people can make you upset. Yeah. People will anger you. People will. And you're allowed to tell them that when you said that made me angry, you triggered an emotional response in me. The same way when you pinched me, that hurt me. And I use the physical health, but there are differences, but like I think they're quite relatable in that sense. So something that I would always practice is being able to say, when you said this, it made me feel like this. So I'm going to do this. So I'll contextualize that. So when you said I was lazy, it made me feel like I wasn't good enough. So I'm now going to go into another room and keep my space from you because that upset me. And I think it's partly setting boundaries, which is actually our next podcast, but it's partly being able to inform the people around you, and if they care about you and are empathetic towards you, they should listen and go, okay, maybe I shouldn't do that to her because it's hurt her feelings in that way. But to be able to do that, and I appreciate not everyone has that body-mind connection because of trauma, but that's not what we're talking about today. So if you've not got that and you feel that you struggle with that, then that's another ballpark, and that's okay. But what we are talking about is people that have a slight connection with their body and are able to recognize that when something's going on around them, they have a physical reaction. And I'll do my little nerdy bit. So you've got a vagus nerve, which is part of your nervous system, which runs from your brain to your body. And part of that nerve is to inform your mind of what's happening in your body with your vital organs. So an example I'll give is when I realise the conversation is something that is triggering to me. So it might be talking about bullying, or it might be talking about self-harming. I get like this weird vibration across my chest, and it's like this, I just get tense and a bit shaky. Like I'm actually even feeling it now because I'm talking about the topic that is a little bit triggering for me. So part of listening to your body is going, okay, it's before your mind kicks in. So your body's starting to have that physical response of that shakiness. It's your nervous system going, right, there's something going on in your external environment that's making you feel tense. And then being able to go, okay, I'm shaking. Why? What's happening around me? Okay, so I know my traumas. My traumas are bullying, self-harm, sadly sexual assault. Those are my traumas. Okay, well, this conversation is around those types of triggers. I'm going to now tell the people around me, can we change the conversation because I feel like I'm getting anxious and stressed. So that's probably a more clear-cut way of listening to your body, informing your mind. And that's my way. And part of like how I've learned to do that is from going to therapy, is studying mental health nursing. I think that does help. But that's once you're able to listen to the cues of your body, you're then able to create the language using a slight formula of like, when you're talking about this, it's making me feel like this, so I'm going to do this, whether that's shutting down the conversation or leaving the room. But it's that being able to articulate with yourself so you can start to look after your mental health, so you're not constantly in that state of being triggered or having that physical response. And then it's also being able to communicate with your loved ones, that it's making you feel that way because you've learned how to listen to your body and therefore understand why your mind is being triggered.
Yeah, and it is this listening to your body, isn't it? So maybe stepping back and, we're talking about, you might not be feeling this or notice this or understand it. And I suppose what we're sharing is that we're still navigating this, but how did we learn that? And I think that is sort of, so I would know I was feeling upset or sad or angry. Angry was really interesting. I just felt sad. It's that weird thing actually, because when I was being bullied, I felt sad for me. And actually, if I felt angry about the bully, and I think if I'd just been more angry with your bullies, but I just felt sad about the way humans were behaving, and that was complicated because I think, we're going to talk about this, but I think I had a level of empathy that anyone who was bullying me was actually, I could pick up the vibe that they were a very sad person, and it was a combination. So I'm using the word sad a lot, aren't I? I'm not using anger, and so understanding what's going on in a situation is really, really important, and why you're behaving that way. But the other thing that I used to do that I now recognise was really not helpful, but I would just go over and over the problem. So I'd feel the feelings, be feeling sad, and then I would talk to people about what was going on, and it was fact, it was happening, it was real. I was being bullied by this person at work, the behaviour was real and it was happening, but I couldn't I was finding it hard to get to a solution. I just go over and over the problem with multiple people over and over again, almost re-traumatizing myself and re-upsetting myself. And whereas actually, if I'd known to tap into the feelings and go, this is okay, you're feeling this because this is wrong, I would have got maybe to a place better, more quickly about, well, what are you going to do about this?
Yeah, we've discussed this, and because I especially between the age of like 17 to probably like 21, I was kind of the same, that hyperfixation on a situation and those feelings around that situation and not being able to move on from it. And I like mine was like, do boys, as I think more for most age groups, but like if a boy hurt my feeling, a particular guy, and my friends start saying like, can you just move on? Like, why do you keep on talking about this guy like he's a piece of XYZ? Just men are worthless, just move on. Which, if you're a woman listening, you absolutely, like, you know that is the kind of, that's what your girlfriends talk about. It's a lot of like, oh, just get over him, like he's done nothing, like you're beautiful, you're better than him, like just move on. And there's that's okay, but I think for me and like for you, there's a slight dismissiveness in that. It's not like you're invalidating, but it's slightly dismissive. And I think I reflect on that particular scenario with this guy, and I kind of wish that someone had just sat me down and said, do you know what, I'm noticing you're really upset about this, and that's fair because what he did was horrible. Like, are you okay? Because I'm noticing you're bringing it up, and like, why don't you have any closure on it? And I think if I'd kind of been supported, but that takes emotional intelligence and maturity a little bit.
Yes.
But I think if I'd been supported to find some closure in it, I wouldn't have been as hyperfixated. If someone had helped me name my feelings in it. And that's why having good people around you is so important. It's also why I'm noticing now my friends are more like that. Like, but that's because I'm older.
Who you choose
To have in your space. Like, I know I need people that validate my feelings, because that's how I find my calmness and inner peace. Because if I feel like I'm getting dismissed, and I realise when I'm talking it makes it sound like I'm a really difficult person, like I'm not really complicated. But I think feelings are complicated. People's psychology is complicated. And I think if you have a basic understanding of how to make people feel that they can come to you and talk about their feelings, then it's not as complicated. You know, your emotions don't have to be complex. You're allowed to understand them and be able to communicate them in a way that works for you, and set those boundaries with people to keep your mental health safe. Because ultimately, it does come back to, when you don't look after your mental health in the preliminary stages, it can end up, in our experiences, it can end up to having a mental illness and having a breakdown. And a lot of what is less mental health is kind of like catching those signs before you get to, we're helping have those conversations before it gets to that point of tension in your life. Because once you're there, the recovery out of it, in my experience, is quite,
it's long,
a slippery slope. But you get through it, you do it, but it's catching it before you get to that, and that's what mental wellness is.
Which is why, I suppose, we've talked about why are we doing this podcast, what's the point. It's not to, you know, beat ourselves up that we didn't know what we knew back then, and it's not to be the advice guru for the next generation, but I think it's something about wanting to kind of reduce the stigma, open up this sort of discussion that, you know, feelings are a normal part of who we are. You know, you're no more complex than any other human being. It's just choosing how you want to rock in the world. You know, and I guess everybody is different, and if you're happy with the way you're thinking and feeling, then you're probably not listening to this podcast. So it's not for those people who have got all this sussed and are quite happy. But if you're not happy with how you're feeling, then it's about getting in touch with that and understanding that. And it's not to take those things out of the way. You know, I was talking to a friend who, you know, said, gosh, I was in the gym and I was hitting the punch bag, you know, getting all that anger out. And I said, like, what was that anger about? She said, I don't know, I was just getting it out.
Because that's the physical element of it, isn't it? It's just having that tension. Like sometimes before a podcast, Mum and I will like dance and sing and things. And I think it's because we're realising, well, like before we do these podcasts, we have that breakdown of what we're going to talk about, and we have, you know, we open those wounds a little bit in order to have a good conversation while we're recording. But we just have to get that energy out, because if not, you're holding it in your body, and it's that homeostasis, it's that inner peace that if you don't get it out your system, it just builds up and builds up and builds up, and then you just live, you rock about this world with this feeling of like you're unsettled. That's part of, you can get the physical element out, but also getting out by chatting. Now, Mum and I are chatters, like talking is our thing. But it's our thing because we also know how helpful it is to just get out what you need to get out in a productive way with people that can help you get it out in a productive way.
But equally, you know, we're saying that, you know, we're saying naming feelings, and we're talking a lot about how to have maybe more understanding of yourself and better conversations with others to improve your relationships or to deal with problems. I think that's what we're saying. However, what we're recognising is that people have different coping mechanisms, so we're not saying that there's a right or wrong. What we're saying is if you can identify what's going on in your body, and if it means I'm not going to talk to anyone, I'm going to go to the gym and thrust a little bejeebers out of a punch bag, and that helps you feel better, that is a recognition of getting something out that you need to get out, and in a safe environment. You know, you're not punching someone else or hurting someone else. And I think that's in terms of kindness, you know, just talking about, you know, it's about that bit of being kind to yourself. I mean, I remember, I remember though, when I was learning to be a coach, and that's the other thing we talked about, is like, I feel very fortunate that I've had probably one of the best jobs to have, because it's helped me on my own personal journey as well as having a very good professional career. But I remember when in coaching we talked about be your own best friend. So when you talk about, you know, somebody who you know, finding friends that you really connect with and can listen to you, be your own best friend.
Like validate your own feelings.
Yes.
I mean,
So when somebody's, you know, if you're beating yourself up for not dealing with something or managing something or thinking about it, that's not helpful. You know, that's going to perpetuate the problem. So, but if you're able to sit back a little bit objectively and be your best friend and think about, well, what would I say if it was somebody else? What would my best friend say to me? Or what would I say to my best friend? If
you're a healthy, emotionally intelligent best friend.
Sometimes. But what would you say? And what you're talking about there, Cara, is about, so we're showing both things. We're saying, because this is a relationship podcast, so you're sharing it with, you know, so if you actually acknowledge that person's feelings, you know, so you talk a lot about how you help others by saying, you know, gosh, that sounds really difficult.
Non-judgmental.
I hear what you're saying, but if you acknowledge a person's feelings and then listen and don't rush to fix, so there's a little bit about doing that in reverse. If you're being your own best friends, acknowledge the feelings. You're allowed to feel sad, you're allowed to feel angry, you're allowed to feel frustrated, you're allowed to feel envy, you're allowed to feel all these different emotions, and we need to come up with more words for them because they're all quite different. But notice what you're noticing and then decide what you need to do about it. And that might be nothing, that might be just going, I'm feeling that. I like the envy one, that's a new one I'm learning a bit about, but you know, I'm envious that person's kid didn't have mental health problems. I'm really envious of that. But if you notice it and go, do you know what, that's okay. Aren't they lucky that their kid hasn't, you know, but also knowing that everyone is dealing with their own issues. So if somebody has something that you don't have, then they'll have something else that they're having difficulty managing, because that's what I found out from life. So it's that being your own best friend or being kind to yourself is trying to turn it on its head and think about when you're having a feeling, an emotion, a body reaction, to pay attention to it. because actually by paying attention to it, it will give you more information about what you need to do.
I think as well, like, I think another version is I sometimes feel really sad. Like, I've got a particular thing in my life, which I shan't go into, but just because I don't want to. But I'm grieving it. Mum, you know what I'm talking about. So, like, you know, and I go through that grief, and my partner, bless him, because he's just lovely and kind, and he wants to fix. But we've got to the point, you know, this grief's been throughout our whole relationship. We've got to the point where I'm like, I don't need to fix it. I actually just need to grieve. And that's as well. You're allowed to sit in that space and give yourself the time to be in that space. And same, I used to have like a week where I was no longer depressed, but I was in a low mood. I'm like, do you know what? I actually just need to hide in my room and be in a low mood for a week. Because I'll come out the other side. I don't need anyone to fix this. I know within myself I don't need anyone to fix this. I had people wanting to make it better for me, but actually going, I know the one thing I need is to seclude myself and pull away from people and to sit in that space. And it's a horrible space, but I know that I need to do that in order to feel better. So there's nothing wrong with, if you're listening and saying, I'm in this low space, or again to this low space, thinking, oh, I've got to jump away, like jump in straight away and start fixing it. It's when it becomes chronic.
That's really important, Cara. I think that's a really important point, that you know, because we're talking a bit about getting to solutions, not just talking through the problem. There's a lot of value with just talking and getting it out off your chest, isn't there? So I suppose there's a difference between talking and getting it off your chest, and, you know, ruminating on a problem then that's not helpful, where you're just going over and over and over and you're actually never getting out of that cycle, and all you do is re-traumatizing yourself.
It's like a productive way of handling it. So like, if you know you need to ruminate, like, it's almost like having that consciousness and saying to yourself, I need to hyperfixate on this thing because that's my process and I know I'll get better if I do that. There's a difference between naming that and just doing it. It's like, I would say, I know I need to lie in bed today because that's what's going to make me feel better, and I need to, my thing's cartoons. So like, I need to watch cartoons because I know that'll make me feel better, rather than just doing it without knowing why you're doing it. And that's part of that, learning yourself and your mind and your psychology, rather than just doing the thing knowing that you're productively doing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about coping. So you know, we're sharing with you some of the things we've learned about healthy and unhealthy coping. So in whatever way you cope, as long as you think it's a healthy coping mechanism for you and you're happy with that, that's absolutely fine. And I name that very clearly about understanding it and happy with it, because for some people it's not helpful to, for example, withdraw, you know, and isolate yourself. If you're then beating yourself up for, I'm doing this again, I'm hiding away from everybody, you know. But if you're hiding away from everyone to look after yourself and repair and get better, then that's a good coping mechanism.
It's also like, you know, at the end of the day, we're natural beings. So what you naturally do when you don't feel well, listen to that and think, okay, maybe this is my way of coping. Like, if it's and I say this quite strongly as, you know, someone that did use self-harm as a way of coping, if it's a healthier version, so if it's not going to cause you other damage, so for example, like drinking, drugs, self-harming, doing adrenaline based activities like motorcycle, like risky behaviours like unprotected sex, things like that, these are considered coping mechanisms, but they are detrimental, incredibly detrimental to your health, and at times fatal. So I'll go into it a little bit, but my coping mechanism with my self-harming, that was because, and I can name it, but I had no emotional regulation. I had been subjected to so much abuse for so long that I had these huge, very complicated emotions, and a real intense self-hatred, because the whole language I was hearing from my peer group was that I wasn't good enough. So my way of coping was self-harming. There's a lot of stigma around self-harming, and this will be its own podcast in itself. But what is to be recognised about self-harming is it's a coping mechanism that is protected, in a sense that you would rather, if your child is really struggling with their mental health, self-harming is viewed as a basically it's like the stage before suicide attempts. So, and this is really hard to say, but if your child's self-harming, don't strip that coping mechanism away from them and make them stop, because at times it's the thing that's stopping them from taking their life. And that was for me. And that was my unhealthy coping mechanism.
So one of the things we talked about, Cara and I, before we started the podcast was the difficulty I have where Cara's, very openly expressing that she was helped to find and name her feelings. However, I assumed that if that happened in a family, your child wouldn't self-harm. I understood self-harm was to be something that happened because children didn't have an outlet or a way of expressing their feelings and didn't feel safe to talk to their parents in some way. So when we found out Cara was self-harming, it was another shame for me that I had failed because I hadn't stopped that happening, and that was an unhealthy coping mechanism. Whereas what Cara's now sharing is I'm hearing that it was actually a healthy coping mechanism.
When I did it healthily, so that I respect your boundaries, I won't go into it, but when I learned how to do it in a way that wasn't fatal to my health.
Yes.
And I started recognising that it was a coping mechanism, I was able to do it safely.
Yeah.
And that's what I was saying, going on to say, is that we all have coping mechanisms in different ways, and sometimes when we don't have the capacity to name our feelings because we're in a state of trauma, survival mode, it can come out in very destructive ways. But I think I wish I'd known it sooner, but I wish I'd known that my self-harming was a coping mechanism. And I wasn't just this, the stigma when I was growing up around it was horrendous, but I wasn't just this attention-seeking teenager. I was actually a teenager that was using something that was going to stop me from leaving this earth. And it's an example of, even though growing up I was given a space to talk about my feelings, there's a little bit of, because I was in a state of, I didn't have the mental capacity really to name my feelings. I think I was a child, and I didn't, and that's why I wish there had been more education in school before I got to that point. I wish that language, so like we're saying, like the language, I think my age group's maybe got a slightly bigger vocabulary when it comes to emotions, so like frustrated, stressed, jealous, guilty. It goes a bit more in depth. And I worked in a nursery for a bit, and these were the kind of words that were on the wall in the self-regulation bit. It was like, are you feeling guilty? Like, are you feeling, anxious? Like, which are all human emotions. They're not, doesn't mean you're broken if you're feeling those things. But I wish I'd kind of had that language a little bit sooner, because then I might not have ended up in a position where I didn't know how to articulate my feelings in a way that people understood. And but part of that is because of my therapy, my latter years with my mental capacity, like my brain had grown a bit more.
Yeah.
And I am now someone that is very good at communicating their feelings and naming their feelings, because I spent a lot of time where, because I didn't have the language, I had to go out of my way to try and explain what I was feeling. I've noticed that about myself. I'm very good, because I felt like I had a lot of adults who didn't listen, and I had to really find ways, without having the actual formal language of being like, I'm emotionally unregulated, I'm stressed, this XYZ. I had to find a way of getting the adults to listen, and that was by maybe oversharing, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think we need people to overshare because
Well, that's
listen.
That's about reducing stigma, isn't
Yeah.
it? You know, you could argue that's exactly what we're doing through these podcasts, but we're doing it with the intention of reducing the stigma. And it's that bit about saying these things happen in life. And you're right, you know, I mean, I was talking with somebody yesterday and just talking about stigma, and in the last podcast talking about you going to the sick room when you were, you know, you were struggling, and you explained why you went to the sick room, you know, to get that one-to-one safe space with an adult away from the people who were
nurturing, like a skilled nurse as well, really like.
And how you're bullying. And I spoke to somebody who worked in the school, and she said, yeah, because we were talking about how it's changing through the generations, because that's what this is about. And she said, yeah, she got that, she understood that children went to the sick room because they were struggling with something else, didn't know what it was. Sometimes just it was a maths and they didn't want to do maths, I could relate to that. But that she understood that people went to the sick room because there was something else going on. But teachers would often say, oh, it's so and so, they're always in the sick room, rather than finding out why are they always in the sick room. You know, and I think that's what we're trying to do here, isn't it? Is say that yes, it might be just to get out of maths, but you know, at least find out whether it's about getting out of maths or whether it's because when you're sitting in that maths table, that's when your bullies can attack you because they've got one-on-one.
Or it's you're so anxious because the pressure to be good at maths is so great.
Yeah.
You know, but it's like I think a lot of like learning how to name your feelings and communicate them, it also comes through like good mirroring, people to be able to mirror. Like you were good at being able to articulate your feelings with your mental illness in a child appropriate way, and I think that's really key. You didn't expose me to too much of the dark side of mental illness, and I think I mirrored that. So your ability to communicate your own feelings with me, I was able to mirror from a very young age because it's what I was growing up with.
But you also did different, you know, that's the thing, and I think that's the thing about, so I want to say something, it's just occurred to me, but learning from your child. So what's so lovely about this is, you know, I've talked about how I felt a failure as a parent because I couldn't fix Cara, and how she, you know, is hurting so much. However, what's so lovely about this is through this very difficult time and processing and all the things we've been through, is that I have learned so much from Cara. So when you talk about, you know, I take myself to bed when I'm not well or I watch cartoons, I mean, the number of times you'll say to me now, because I was not taught that, I was taught if you're feeling any feelings, probably be busy.
Which I think there's a time and a space for that as well. Like I sometimes, because I'm fed up with that feeling, like this grief feeling, like I'm so tired of feeling this grief.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna keep myself busy because it's just gonna be there.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of when the situation isn't easily changed, like this, the trigger for this grief isn't easily fixed.
Yeah.
And I can't really do anything to make those feelings go away. They just get triggered and they come up. There is a little bit of being busy because you're going like, do you know what? I'm just gonna feel these things and this. Oh, I've seen this thing and it's triggered that feeling, so I'm just.
Yeah.
But it's when I think there's a difference when you know the situation has a kind of fix to it, and you might not know it, but there's a little bit of like, if it's a job that you hate and it's making you feel low, it's like, okay, well, there's also a little bit you know actually part of the fix will be leaving that job.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a time and a place, but it's knowing it within yourself. You know, that's what worked for me. Is being able to contextualize those emotions. So I know one thing will get better because the environment's going to get better, and then I know there's one type of emotion that's just going to kind of be there, and sometimes I need to just ignore it because it's always going to be there.
Yeah, so it's back to this, you know, the podcast today, you know, what we're talking about is, you know, what is naming feelings, and so I suppose what we've shared with you is how actually complicated it is to name your feelings. Just to say, so what we've talked about is how complex it is to understand your physical reaction, to name your feelings, to have relationships with others. But hopefully what we've shared today is some of our story and our journey that's helped us get to a better place as individuals, but also in our relationship as mum and daughter.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing. I think once you learn to navigate what you're feeling physically, this is my view on it, and this is what helped me. But once I was able to navigate my physical responses, it helped me to inform my emotional response and the behaviours that came with that, whether they were behaviours of concern or not, and the benefits of being able to do that. Like, I have much healthier relationships with the people around me because I'm able to listen to what my body is telling me when I'm with them. Like, I think back to some of the guys I dated, I'm like, this version of me that recognises my feelings would never have allowed them a second date.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, because I think this version of me is a lot more emotionally mature, it's a lot more emotionally intelligent, and that's come from working on listening to what my body is telling me. And I wish I'd known it sooner. I wish my journey wouldn't have taken me to 24. I'm sure you wish your journey wouldn't have taken you to...
so old.
But I'm sure you wish your journey had